Thank you all for coming. My name is Dara, and I am the Panoramas coordinator for this academic year. For those of you who don't know, Panoramas is an online student-led publication dedicated to the news, research, culture, and art of Latin America, the Caribbean, and the Latinx diaspora. Panoramas is made up of a team of undergraduate interns who work really hard to put out many different articles throughout the semester. They explore new topics that they're interested in and want to learn more about. If you want to stay up to date with what Panoramas is doing, please like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and also subscribe to our weekly newsletter. I'll be sending a message in the chat with all of those links shortly. Today, Panoramas intern Luke Morales will be discussing human trafficking in Latin America and how a lack of gender awareness within government policies has exacerbated this issue. Luke worked extremely hard on his article and on this presentation, so I ask that you all keep in mind that this is only a portion of the work that he did. I encourage you all to read his article if you have not already. I'll also be sending a link to that in the chat. I also want to make a quick disclaimer that this presentation offers a very wide perspective on a really big issue that has affected many people in many different ways. Because of that, not everything will be able to be covered or discussed. Luke will be discussing general trends throughout the region and then focusing on overarching solutions to address them. So while Luke is presenting and during the discussion, please feel free to use the chat feature if you have any comments or reactions. We also encourage you to use the raise hand feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen if you want to share during our periods of discussion. We are really looking forward to having a great discussion on this topic. So Luke, go ahead and take it away.
Awesome, thank you. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We, the Panoramas team, are very excited to be here for the first roundtable of the academic year. For this roundtable, I will be discussing human trafficking in Latin America, a problem still very, very prevalent today, and how the lack of gender awareness in policies and governments give way to the trade and the exploitation of gender differences and of mostly women. So before we get started, I want to give a quick disclaimer in addition to Dara's that my presentation is a broad, generalized overview of the problem in Latin America. Because of that, I won't be going into the specifics of each country. I simply hope to explore the issue at a higher level to address larger patterns of inequality. Additionally, my presentation is aimed at Latin American policy, and it's not meant to discount the many efforts that current Latin American activists are making. And I'll also touch on that later in this presentation. So with that being said, let me just give a short synopsis of my article. In it, I discuss how sex trafficking in Latin America has worked to emphasize the differences in gender while exploiting them for profit. I provide statistics showing its prevalence in Latin America while also showing that it disproportionately affects women. I then discuss some contributing factors such as machismo, limited economic opportunities for women, etc. And I conclude by proposing potential solutions to slow and eventually end the trade. My research on homeless women as a vulnerable group was based on a 2019 study. My research on sex trafficking in Latin America as a whole, on the other hand, was based on a 2006 study published in a journal on labor issues and a 2011 UN report on trafficking in Latin America and the Caribbean. So for this roundtable, I will be going over trafficking statistics in a 2020 report by the UN Office on Drugs and Crime to see how trafficking in Latin America has evolved and how it still affects the region today. Women represent the majority of people who are trafficked in South America. As you can see on the figure to the left, as of 2018, the shares of detected trafficked people were 69% women and 25% men. 64% of these people trafficked were for the purpose of sexual exploitation. If we take a look at the middle figure, we also see that about 35% of trafficked people are exploited for forced labor, and about 1% are trafficked for other forms of exploitation. This is interesting because it shows the scope of exactly how big the trafficking system as a whole is. Also, men represent the majority of people who are responsible for trafficking. The figure on the right reveals that the shares of those convicted of trafficking in South America were 67% men and 33% women. Still, however, 1/3 of these people convicted for trafficking were women. Does anyone want to discuss why you think that is? And you can, again, put something in the chat. You can raise your hand. Yeah. Yeah, Ben?
Might women be used almost to lure victims in because they seem like they're safer?
Yeah, that's definitely one factor that does contribute. So we're faced with this question. Are women offenders in a similar position to their victims, or are they willingly trafficking other women? Obviously, the answer is far from clear. Excuse me, but let's walk through some potential solutions or potential answers. First, we know from the thriving of human trafficking how effective coercion and control can be. Many imprisoned female foreign nationals are known to have been coerced or trafficked into offending, and it's not unusual for women to say that they offended to, quote, keep their man. However, this view of female offenders as powerless and controlled by men also ignores that some women may be willing participants, whether that be to improve a financial situation or some other reason. And another answer brings into play victim offenders. These people are offenders with a history of victimization. A critical time for a trafficked woman is when she has cleared any debt. And at this point, some women are known to transition to offenders choosing to stay and work in the trafficking industry with the desire for a better life. In this context, classifying female criminals as victims or offenders ignores this victim offender network, and it seems to simplify the complexity of a lot of female criminality. Continuing on, these two graphics show the number of countries in each respective region introducing a specific offense on trafficking in persons from 2003 to 2020. The top graphic represents data for South America, and the bottom represents data for North America, Central America, and the Caribbean. As we can see in South America, the data shows a jump in criminalizing most or all forms of trafficking according to UN protocol from 1 out of 11 countries in 2003 to 10 out of 11 countries in 2020. In North America, Central America, and the Caribbean, we see a similar increase from 2 out of 20 in 2003 to 19 out of 20 in 2020. That's significant movement in the right direction, theoretically. If we look at this graphic, which shows average detection rates of trafficked people from 2003 to 2018, we see that in South America, Central America, and the Caribbean, there has been an overall major increase in detection. This then begs the question, why? Is this detection because of the adoption of better policies, or is this increase due to increased rates of trafficking? I'm hesitant to believe the answer is the former, and in this presentation, I will be explaining why. But before we get started on the next parts of my presentation, I'd like to know some of your opinions and thoughts about this information and provide an opportunity for some discussion. Did you find anything particularly interesting in the statistics or in what I said? Were you aware of this information before? Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Personally, something that I found to be interesting and also surprising and concerning was the fact that we saw that over time there has been an increase in policies designed to address the issue of human trafficking in the region. However, we're also seeing that there's an increase in the detection of human trafficking. So I do think that there has been an improvement in the methods of measuring this human trafficking, but it's pretty concerning to see this increase over time, and it makes you question the actual efficacy of these policies that were enacted, and are they actually doing the job that they were kind of intended to do?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for that. Peyton?
I think it's interesting too, kind of going off of what they were saying, the increase in the number of countries that have legal action against this, but there are still countries that don't have legal action against this too. Is that true?
Yeah.
Is that what the graphic said?
Essentially, yes. It's not specific legislation that criminalizes specifically this kind of trafficking. So
that's very interesting to me that even still today there was that one, right? There's still that one that hasn't. And I want to know, why, what the reasoning is for not having legislation against it.
Yeah.
Hi. Sorry. I think this is very, very interesting. I'm sorry for the background, but I feel that there is some kind of a protective factor in Latin America. And even though the numbers here are very concerning, of course, when you compare the numbers of victims to the number of victims in other places like the Middle East or Africa, then these numbers are actually very small. But even though there is a protective factor that I think is linked to how families are in Latin America, I feel that is very unfair. And as you, I guess, are going to explain later on, the machismo is still very prevalent in our culture. And I think that of course, influences a lot of the results that we are seeing in these graphs, and also the policies that are in place. And to what Peyton was saying, I feel that there are many countries that have a lot of rural areas that have their own laws, and they have cultural practices that do include sex trafficking, but those practices are really not recognized as sex trafficking. So it is normal for some countries to see children having, like, girls being pregnant at like 12 or 14 years of age, and having multiple sex partners, and that would be considered sex trafficking here in the US, right? But that is not considered that in like specific parts of those countries.
Yeah, you brought up a lot of really good points. Thank you for that. I don't know. In my research, I didn't really look into other countries, but this idea that I had to focus on this topic in Latin America was inspired by a documentary I saw that talked about the seriousness of sex trafficking specifically in Europe. So I definitely don't doubt that what you're saying is true. So I really appreciate what you said. Thank you for that. Awesome. Cool. So now let's move on to a little terminology. In this context, what do you think gender awareness means? And again, you can use the chat, you can raise your hand, you can just unmute if you want to.
I read your article. So, but I have to say that I was very surprised when I read the definition. It was also education for me. Yeah, so it's as your article said, it's the ability to view society from the perspective of gender roles and understand how this has affected women's needs in comparison to the needs of men. I thought that was like a great definition, and I really have never thought about the definition of gender awareness like from this perspective.
Yeah, and obviously gender awareness can be defined as many different things, but I decided that this definition best encompassed what was needed to tackle this topic of sex trafficking, human trafficking. So yeah, thank you for that. So yeah, as she said, this is the definition: the ability to view society from the perspective of gender roles and understand how this has affected women's needs in comparison to the needs of men. And this is according to the European Institute for Gender Equality. So in other words, can we recognize that societal systems and structures unconsciously create molds for genders? And can we then use this recognition to understand how these molds have also created gender disparities? And I would also like to add that though this definition highlights women's needs in comparison to men, we can also apply said definition to non-binary and trans people. Did you notice their absence from my statistics? Why are they not in these statistics? That in itself is a lack of gender awareness. So I would like to take a minute to discuss these populations. In my research, I haven't been able to find much statistics-wise relating to trafficking in Latin America when examining these populations. And that acts as a testament to how critical this need for gender awareness is. It is in itself, as I mentioned, a lack, even an absence in this case, of gender awareness. In regard to feminism and discussions about women's rights, trans women and gender diverse people have historically been left out of the conversation. And this lack of attention occurs among trans exclusionary radical feminists, also known as TERFs among trans activists. Not only do they fail to address the realities of sex work among trans and gender diverse people, but they have also tended to debate and delegitimize the very existence of trans identities. Trans and queer feminist movements have existed for decades, yet only recently have they begun being incorporated into mainstream discussions. However, it's still not enough. Without trans and gender diverse populations being taken into account in this context of human trafficking, it is impossible to create comprehensive policies that work toward ending this slave trade. I'd now like to go over quickly and acknowledge the strides that many Latin American activists have taken to fight the patriarchy in the region. Latin American feminist movements have been very active in this area. This wave of feminism has centered on a number of critical issues in relation to women, such as gender violence, reproductive autonomy, representation across sectors. One example lies in Argentina. Its feminist movement helped drive the abortion legislation passed in 2020, and it also helped the creation of the Ministry of Women, Gender, and Diversity. Another example can be seen in Chile. Feminists and other activists secured gender parity in their constitutional convention to write a new constitution. Gender parity refers to the equal contribution of women and men to any given thing. It will be one of the most representative bodies in the country's history, and it is the first such institution in the world to have complete gender parity by design, consisting of 77 women and 78 men. And there are many more examples of feminist progression in the region. However, despite these victories, women's and gender issues continue to dominate government policy. So one factor contributing to human trafficking in a way is lingering machismo. Does anyone want to explain what you think machismo is? Have you ever experienced examples of it in your life? Are you aware of any other examples? Isabel?
Yeah, so I would just say that machismo is like strong, like masculine pride, and just using that to like make women feel less than.
Yeah, it's pretty much exactly that. Machismo essentially is a strong, exaggerated sense of masculine pride. And this pride often enables men to hold themselves above women, to see themselves as stronger than, smarter than, better than. This contributes to the success of the trafficking in Latin America in multiple ways, because for one, it leads to discrimination against women. It also restricts economic opportunities for women in Latin America. For example, in many countries, women are often constricted to low-wage, informal sector jobs, despite having achieved the same or higher educational levels as men. And it is this limited opportunity for women that creates risk factors pushing them to seek work abroad, which in turn makes it easier for them to begin working in trafficking. And some other factors that contribute to trafficking in the region include the following: high demand for sex work, economic crisis in countries, homelessness, and many countries prioritizing other issues they deem more pressing. Additionally, many countries having few, if any, shelters for trafficked people and no follow-up plans to help them after they return to their former residences. If governments do not help these people, they're going back to the same exact place where in many cases they left from to seek better jobs. So if governments turn blind eyes to these people, what's to keep them from turning right back around and saying, at least there, I was making some money? Also, the lack of gender awareness, as I mentioned, in Latin America plays a role. Feminist research argues that it isn't realistic to expect women to benefit from any policy unless it is gender aware, meaning that for a policy to work toward mending an issue disproportionately affecting women, said policy must be created by people who have the ability to see society from the perspective of gender roles, to examine how women's needs differ from those of men, and to then acknowledge that these policies do not come in a one-size-fits-all package. And the same argument applies to trans, queer, non-binary, and gender non-conforming people. So what are some implications of human trafficking? One primary one is the continued victimization of women while disregarding their exploitation. Machismo, as mentioned earlier, allows men to see women as lesser than, which results in those who are freed of this slavery being labeled as victims and denying them agency. This then allows governments to ignore the issues which led them to seek better working conditions in the first place. Also, though not as prevalent, is denying men who have been trafficked the ability to be heard and taken seriously. We see from these statistics that the percentage of detected men who have been trafficked has increased over the years. But in my research, I've noticed that much trafficking conversation embraces a women-centered approach, and there are likely additional different factors which lead to men being trafficked. And we must also explore these factors to work toward a solution. And another implication is the continued thriving of informal sector jobs. These jobs are those based mostly on casual employment rather than contractual arrangements with formal guarantees. And this also means that these jobs are neither regulated nor protected by the state. And being that women are a more vulnerable group and are more likely to work in these informal sector jobs, women are then more likely to have no social safety net. So if they lose their job, they have nothing else to rely on. If women had access to more formal sector jobs, they wouldn't feel as pressured to work in fields which more often lead to trafficking. As we discussed previously, it's important to have gender-aware policies when combating human trafficking. So let's quickly take a look at what a gender-aware policy looks like. One program in Argentina created by its Ministry of Women, Gender, and Diversity has recently taken a step toward recognizing societal gender disparities. Their Accompany program is aimed at women and LGBTQ+ populations who are in situations of gender violence throughout the country. Its main objective is to strengthen the economic independence of women and LGBTQ+ people in these situations. This includes economic support in the form of the country's living salary for 6 consecutive months to these populations, and access to psychosocial strengthening devices for the people included in the program, which are coordinated with provincial and local governments. There isn't data that discusses the effectiveness of this program yet because of its recent introduction in August. And though not aimed specifically at people who are trafficked, it certainly acts as a stepping stone and a model for future governmental programs looking to tackle the issue of gender disparities. And now I'm going to discuss potential solutions which could work to end human trafficking. One of them involves shifting focus inward in relation to world governments and policies. Are the policies in place effective, and do we have the data that shows this? Are they made to help the at-risk groups, which in this case are women, or are they meant as placeholders to focus on matters deemed more pressing? And are there women providing input in making these decisions? Also, governments may choose to analyze specific factors directly which are responsible for creating the risks associated with human trafficking. One example is homelessness. Being that homeless women are a highly vulnerable group worldwide and that there is scarce research on the plight of homelessness among women in Latin America, researching how to improve their well-being can promote healthier social and emotional developmental trajectories. A model of this research is the study I cover in my article, conducted in 2019, examining 240 Mexican homeless women and girls. The study found that symptoms of depression and anxiety influence well-being, and that designing and implementing interventions that increase such well-being positively affects social competence, assertiveness, and cognition. Studies like this are critical when it comes to developing effective policies to address the subjective and mental well-being in homeless women and girls. And it is ultimately gender-focused policies, at least in the world's current state, that take into consideration these factors that will work to end the human trafficking system. So thank you for listening and participating. I now want to open the floor for free open discussion. I have proposed a few questions below to start the conversation. So I'll read the first two. What are some policies that should be gender aware in their implementation? And why has the issue of human trafficking been so hard to address? You can choose to answer these. You can also answer any other question. This is really an open discussion for any opinions, questions, and things like that. So feel free to use the chat, raise your hand, unmute. Yeah, Nadia?
Some other policies, of course, would be reproductive policies, whether that's pregnancy or birth control, just consulting with those who are going to be affected by those who identify as women. And I believe like the issue of human trafficking has been so hard to address because of how hard it is to detect it. A lot of times it occurs in plain sight, and it's probably harder to detect it and hard to have the statistics on it, and there's not enough research being done on it.
Yeah, you bring up really good points. And also there's no way to like monitor it. Like the government isn't like taxing people, for working in, it's very much an informal kind of job, which is part of the reason why it's so difficult to keep track of. And also why it's important to try to go like head first into this problem so that we could, try to fix it as soon as possible. Yeah, Kaylin?
Great job, Luke. No, I think, regarding the first one, I think it's important to have gender awareness glasses or lenses for any kind of policies, because there will be some impact on, whether it's women and girls or even, right, gender nonconforming, non-binary, and trans people, as well as men and boys, right? Like comprehensive gender aware policies will help everyone, and like gender equality ends up helping everyone, right? It's not just, what we would imagine as women and girls. So I think keeping that in mind, just as we are trying to push for more like anti-racist policies and anti-racism to be, anti-racist lens for all policies that we come up with, I think that's important, especially in a global context. Good job.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for that. I definitely think when we talk about these gender aware policies, it has to be more than just men and women, because especially now there has been such big movements throughout the world in regard to the LGBTQ plus community, where people are no longer identifying as part of this binary, or really as part of, lots of people aren't even identifying as being conforming to gender, right? So yeah, you bring up a really good point. Ben?
Yeah, first I wanted to say that I really liked its presentation. It was really amazing, and I learned a lot. And going off of the second question, I think another reason why this issue has been so hard to address is because, like you said, the victimization of victims of human trafficking, but also I think the stigmatization of things like sex work, like just these people aren't really considered high priority issues by a lot of governments just because they're somehow considered to be immoral and not worth their time due to their victimization.
Yeah, for sure. Even now, historically, even now, sex work, it does have this huge stigma around it, and many people, when they catch wind of someone working within like the sex work, they're all of a sudden less than, and not as important, which is also something we need to work on addressing and changing. Ashley?
Hi, first of all, beautiful presentation. Couldn't keep my eyes off. My ears are open. Thank you for this. I was gonna say for like the first question, I don't really have any not so much like policies, like specific ones or like specific solutions, but I think one like tactic in which we can look towards like researching more and making more like available literature for people to understand like the effects of like that trafficking has on like gender nonconforming people or transgender populations. Like I think there needs to be this like highlighting and like especially looking at not separating so much, but essentially separating like these populations, these minoritized populations, oh my god, and kind of separating that, so then you can like address like youth sex trafficking, with like looking towards like prevention, identifying like the causes and like service provisions and like just understanding the unique experiences to these unique populations would help significantly rather than making like this generalization like, oh, men, women, other, like it's not gonna work. So yeah, I just think like widening and like kind of specifying more like different methods of research and stuff too will help a lot. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think that also plays into my last point in the presentation, about how the study I discussed in my article examining the Mexican homeless women and girls, it can act as a model for anyone, really, any population. They can choose to examine people within the LGBTQ plus community, maybe not even as a whole, just like specifically trans people, specifically gender nonconforming people. So I definitely agree. Yeah, thank you for that. Maria?
Yeah, so I think this was amazing. Thank you for inviting me. And in regards to the first question, I think you are right. We have to promote well-being homeless women, but we also have to recognize that there are indicators of sex trafficking, and maybe we can see who is at risk so we can prevent it. So, for example, we know that teenagers who run away are at the highest risk for being trafficked. So maybe we can fix that, right? Or, for example, people who are in the foster care system, they are also more vulnerable to be trafficked. People with history of sexual abuse are also more vulnerable to be victims of human trafficking. So I think that addressing the indicators or the risk factors that people have to make them vulnerable for trafficking could be a clue in trying to solve this issue. And the other thing that like this, your second question, that why has the issue of human trafficking been so hard to address? I think there is a lot of money behind this, which is a big problem. And to be honest with you all, there is a lot of research and literature, and many efforts from different governments, especially the US government. But the problem is that we really don't know the million of people who are affected, because the estimates are unclear, right? Because this is illegal. These practices are not like something that you can use in regular research, because so this makes it very difficult to actually study and report it. So I think that that's a big problem. And I believe that if we all create awareness that this is an issue, then the spaces that people have to do this kind of practices are going to be smaller. And that's the way how maybe we can try to decrease the amount of victims.
Yeah, for sure. The point you make about it being very like, I don't know exactly what you said, but you mentioned how there was a lot of money backing it. Yeah, I'm pretty sure at this point it's a multi-billion-dollar industry around the entire world, right? And that's part of the reason it's such like a difficult issue to tackle, a difficult problem to resolve, because it's so big, so global, makes so much money. In my research, I quickly read things talking about, corrupt politicians, corrupt police officers who, and people of just like power, like celebrity power, who are participating in these things. And you can find examples, like an example that comes off on the top of my head in the United States was, I think it was called Nexium, where two daughters of a very rich family funded what was advertised as a women's like self-empowerment group, and a bunch of celebrities took part in it. The one who comes up is Allison Mack. She was an actress in Smallville, a TV show from, I think it started in the 90s. And they were sex trafficking women. So yeah, that's a big thing. And to address your first point about the indication factors, I definitely agree. Governments and policies should look towards supporting these people, like Argentina is doing, supporting people in situations of gender violence, support the people who, are at risk of being homeless because they have to go away from home, and things like that. Yeah, Kaylin, thank you for that. That's the that's about Nexium, I think it is. And yeah, things like that. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. Kaylin, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, kind of just to go off of that, like in labor trafficking, I think it's important to hold corporations and organizations more accountable to prevent, modern day slavery, which is like labor trafficking. In the chocolate industry and the coffee industry in Brazil in particular, it's really bad. And just, they have these certifications and whatnot that we look at when we're buying things, and that make them acceptable to be sold at, Giant Eagle or Whole Foods. But like, how often are they actually, going and like reporting people and doing these compliance tours of these plantations, essentially. So we just need to hold these corporations more accountable and be more, everyday consumerism, be smarter about how we buy things, whether it's like buying from Shein, in fast fashion, there's a lot of labor trafficking there. not necessarily in Latin America, but throughout the kind of global context.
Yeah, for sure. And Dara, I know you have your hand raised, but I also wanted to ask you, I don't know, like I can see when things pop up, but I can't seem to open the chat. So if anything pops up in the chat, would you be able to read it for me? Okay, cool, thank you. But yeah.
Yeah, I thought that what Maria said was so interesting because the fact that this is illegal, it's happening underground, it makes it so hard to track. And because it's so hard to track, people don't know as much about it. If governments do want to learn more about it, they are going to have to invest a lot of money into doing that, because of how difficult it is to measure. And I think that along with other issues that involve women specifically, or gender nonconforming people, most often the populations affected by human trafficking are women and gender nonconforming people in low socioeconomic statuses. So these people don't have necessarily the influence to exert to kind of push the government to kind of look more into these issues, to do more funding. And I think that that's also a really big problem, is the people that are most affected by these issues just don't have kind of a seat at the table. They don't have a voice to really discuss how important these issues are. So I think that kind of contributes to a reason why this issue isn't being addressed. It takes a lot of effort and money and resources to really fix it. And the people who are being most affected are the people who have that money or those resources or that power.
Yeah, for sure. And you bring up one of the most important points that I mentioned, that not only should we focus more on these populations, but we should have these populations being the ones making these decisions, because ultimately they're the ones with more experience, and who would better be able to navigate those circumstances. So yeah, for sure. Thank you. Manuel?
Hey, Luke. Nicely done. I wanted to bring up, and I know that you haven't had the best access to the chat, so I wanted to sort of reiterate a question I had sent to you directly earlier, and about how human trafficking and migration patterns track, which on the face of it, you would think it's logical that they would track very closely. One, the numbers of people migrating out of each country, and the destinations as well, right? That human trafficking would, and I don't mean just sex-based labor sort of trafficking, but just a lot of labor trafficking, which seems to me, at least in much of Latin America, something that happens internally within countries. And so I'm wondering if you saw in what you looked at, any sort of information about the internal human trafficking patterns, or for different countries. And I know that you could possibly cover every country, but if you saw anything about internal human trafficking.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm sorry I missed your question. My chat is not working properly.
Don't worry.
But I can't speak for specific countries, but in my research, I did find in the same document that I use for my statistics right now, that 97% of trafficking happening in South America happens domestically. So yeah, not much in the grand scheme of things happens externally, because 3% does happen externally, and that is significant in its own way. But yeah, 97% in South America it's domestic trafficking.
And just a quick follow-up. And did you find any sort of, obviously the US, where lots of people come for economic opportunity and for generally hoping for a better life, but are there other destinations in the hemisphere that seem to pull people as well? sort of beyond the borders?
I'm not sure, to be honest. Yeah, I don't know. Nothing comes to mind when I'm thinking on like the country to country level.
No, just wondering. Yeah, it's just a question. Wondering myself as well. Trying to think along the lines of what you presented. But
yeah, sorry
thank
about
you.
that.
No. Thank you very much. It's a great discussion. Let's see if we can keep it going.
We have time for a couple more questions, a few more questions. Yeah, Dara?
Just thinking about the question, can you think of any other potential solutions to trafficking? I think kind of looking at the root of the issue and the fact that it's just been so hard in general to address any policies that specifically affect women and gender nonconforming people. I think that looking to see how Argentina came about with formulating their policy regarding women and people in the LGBTQ plus community who are in situations of domestic violence, I think it would be really interesting to kind of look at what prompted that policy, how the government was able to kind of get there, because I think that's a really impressive and really unique policy to address this issue that I've never seen before. So I know that all governments have varying levels of resources, of money, but I know most governments in Latin America have a ministry or like a presidential secretary dedicated to specifically addressing women's issues. And I think that maybe one step to kind of getting towards governments that are better able to address these issues would be to look at what the governments that have been a bit more successful in this area, what they've been doing and trying to emulate that, because I think that Argentina's policy is really special.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I agree. Thank you for that. Does anyone else have? Yeah, Bridget?
Yeah, this is just more general, I think, kind of touching on a couple of your questions, but I just feel like it's worth noting when it comes to like thinking about solutions. When I think about the issue of trafficking, a lot of the time I think about like, we've talked a little bit about how we understand it as a scenario in which, traffickers are after money, and in this situation, they're able to take advantage of people in a lower socioeconomic status, people who, like Dara said, like don't have a seat at the table and need a means to live. And then that's how a lot of the time they're swept up into this business. But I think a lot about why people after money are able to take advantage of others so easily through this system is it leads back to so much of how this process is entirely globalized, and it's just made to be efficient, it's made to be predictable, it's made to be like dehumanizing. And so I think like policies moving forward would definitely be effective if they address this issue of poverty in certain countries, but I think it would also be effective to look at those features of what comprises a globalized industry, and at what point is that form of globalization like violating human rights.
Yeah, that opens like so many more doors for discussion, because trafficking is definitely not something that's like very spur of the moment. Oh, like, do you want to come work for me? No, it's very organized, very structured, and that's part of the reason why it has been able to become this global phenomenon and be so successful, making billions and billions of dollars every year, because it's so structured, it's so organized, and it has this way of, while being this together also flying under the radar. So I think you bring up a really good point, and I definitely agree with what you said. Thank you for that. Well, if no one has anything else, we can talk about next week and other things.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Congratulations, Luke. That was a really great presentation. Thank you to everyone who shared their thoughts, and thank you to everyone for attending today. I'm so glad that we were able to really explore this really big and complex issue. I'm really happy with our discussion. Now, I want to let you all know about our next roundtable that we'll be having next week, next Friday, this exact same time. It's going to be on Zoom again. Isabel, one of our other Panoramas interns, is going to be hosting another roundtable. This will be in celebration of Latinx and Hispanic Heritage Month, and we'll be discussing expanding Latinx-owned businesses, especially in the city of Pittsburgh. It's going to be a really great and informative discussion, so I hope that you all can come again and also spread the word about it to other people you know. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to follow us on our social medias and subscribe to our newsletter in order to stay updated with what we're doing. I'll send all of these links in the chat one more time for everyone. But yeah, thank you so much for coming. Have a great weekend, and I hope to see you all again.
Thank you, everyone.
You nicely done.
Thank you.